The problem on the blackboard, the classroom was quiet. A clock ticked on the wall. Outside, the sun burned gently on the cricket field, where boys in white uniforms played with shouts of joy. But inside, the air was heavy. Sundar sat at the back, shoulders slightly hunched, his notebook open. But no one noticed him. He was 14 then, a thin boy from a modest family, wearing a faded school shirt and a pair of worn sandals. His father fixed electrical wires for a living. His mother stayed home and cooked. Sundar never spoke much. He listened, always listened, but rarely spoke. He had a strange calmness in his eyes, as if he knew something others did not got today. However, everything was about to change. Mr. Verma, the most feared teacher in the school, stood at the front. He wore an iron shirt, gold watch, and thick glasses. People said he used to teach at a famous university in the city before he came to this small school. No one really knew why he left. But here he ruled like a king. His students feared him more than they feared their own fathers. "You boys," he said, turning slowly to face the class, "do not understand what it means to think. You memorize and you copy, but none of you has ever shown me that you can really think." He walked to the blackboard, picked up a piece of chalk, and wrote a long equation. Numbers and symbols filled the space. When he was done, he turned and looked at the boys, his eyes like knives. "Solve this," he said. "If any of you has even a little bit of a brain, solve this." The room fell into silence. Sundar kept his head low. Boys around him exchanged nervous glances. Someone coughed. Someone else shuffled their feet. No one moved to the board. Mr. Verma raised his voice. "None of you? You are all worthless then. No respect for knowledge. No respect for your own future. You make me ashamed." Just then, he stopped. His eyes had landed on Sundar. "You, at the back." The air thickened. Sundar looked up slowly. "Yes, you. Boy with the blank notebook. Come here." There was a strange hush in the room. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood up, feeling all the eyes on his back. His heart thudded in his chest. As he walked toward the front, he heard whispers behind him. Why him? He never even speaks. He's going to fail. When he reached the blackboard, Mr. Verma handed him the chalk. "Solve it," he said. "Show us all you are not just another quiet fool." Sundar stood before the board. The numbers glared. Ahem, his hands felt cold. He could feel the teacher's breath behind him, sharp and expectant. He could feel the weight of 30 other boys watching. His mind was quiet. Too quiet. Then something happened. Something inside him shifted. As he looked at the equation, he saw it not as chaos, but as something beautiful. He saw patterns. He saw order. He saw the way numbers moved, the way they danced around each other. He reached out and began to write. His hand moved fast. His eyes glimmered faintly. Line after line appeared on the blackboard, and the room went even quieter. One boy gasped. Another muttered, "What is he doing?" In less than a minute, Sundar stopped. He set the chalk down. His heart was calm again. He stepped back. Mr. Verma looked at the board. For the first time in months, he didn't speak. His mouth fell open slightly. He stepped closer, adjusted his glasses, and read the solution. Slowly. It was perfect. Every line correct. Every step clear. No hesitation. No flaw. The teacher turned to Sundar, and for a second, there was no anger in his eyes. Only something else, something harder to name. Respect. Maybe fear. But before he could say a word, the bell rang loudly, breaking the silence. Students jumped to their feet, gathering their books. Sundar quietly walked back to his seat, sat down, and stared out the window. But everyone around him stared at him now, as if seeing him for the first time, and as Mr. Verma left the room, he muttered to himself so softly no one could hear him, except Sundar. He said, Who are you really?" But Sundar didn't answer, because even he wasn't sure yet. Just then, another boy leaned over and whispered to Sundar, "You're in trouble. You made him look like a fool." Sundar smiled faintly, but didn't reply. Outside, dark clouds gathered. A storm was coming. But this was only the beginning. Asterisk whispers in the storm. Then rain came hard that night. It splashed against the windows of the small house where Sundar lived, drumming like impatient fingers. The power went out just after dinner. The little room fell into darkness, lit only by the faint glow of a kerosene lamp. His mother folded clothes quietly in the corner, while his father sat at the table, polishing his tools. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying bits of paper and dust with it. Sundar sat cross-legged on his bed, staring at his hands. They still smelled faintly of chalk. His fingers traced the faint creases in his palm as though searching for answers hidden there. He could still see the blackboard in his mind, every number, every line. It was strange when he stood there earlier that day. The solution had come to him not as thought but as feeling, as if the numbers spoke to him directly. He wondered if anyone else could feel numbers like that, alive and breathing, full of stories. He thought of Mr. Verma's eyes when he finished solving the problem. The way they had widened just slightly before narrowing again with something darker. Not approval, not pride. Something else. He shivered. A sudden knock at the door made everyone jump. His mother stood quickly, wiping her hands on her sari. She opened the door to find a tall man standing there in the rain, holding an umbrella. The rainwater had soaked through the bottom of his trousers, and his shoes were covered in mud. His face was hard to see in the dim light, but his voice was smooth. "Good evening," the man said. "I apologize for coming so late. May I speak with your son for a moment?" Sundar's father frowned and set down his tools. "Who are you?" "A teacher," the man replied. "From his school." His mother glanced back at Sundar, her eyebrows knitting together. Sundar stood slowly, feeling the weight of the man's gaze on him. The man nodded. "Just a moment outside? That's all." Reluctantly, Sundar followed him out into the rain. They stood under the narrow awning as water poured down around them. The man crouched slightly so their eyes were level. He smelled faintly of tobacco and wet earth. "You solved the problem," the man said softly, his tone careful. "I saw the work you did today." Sundar said nothing, staring at the puddles collecting around their feet. The man leaned closer. "You have a gift, but you already know that, don't you?" Sundar shook his head slowly. "I just like numbers." The man let out a quiet laugh, more than like. "You hear them, don't you? You see patterns no one else sees." Sundar's eyes darted up, startled. How did this stranger know? "Listen," the man continued, lowering his voice even further. "You don't have to hide it. But you do have to be careful. People don't always like what they don't understand." He slipped a small folded card into Sundar's hand and straightened up. "If you ever feel trapped, or if anyone tries to hurt you because of who you are, call me." And then he turned and walked away into the rain, without waiting for Sundar to speak. Inside, Sundar unfolded the card under the lamplight. It was plain, just a name written neatly. Arjun Sen, and below it, a phone number. Nothing more. He slipped the card into his pocket just as his mother returned to the room, her eyes questioning. But she said nothing, and Sundar said nothing too. That night, long after his parents had fallen asleep, Sundar sat awake at his window, listening to the rain. He felt something shift in the air around him, like a string pulled tight. He didn't understand what was happening yet, but he knew the quiet days of sitting at the back of the class, unnoticed, were over. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky clean and bright. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. But as Sundar entered the classroom, he felt all the boys staring at him again, their whispers louder now. "Did you hear? He solved it." Mr. Verma was furious. "No one's ever done that before." Sundar ignored them and slipped into his seat. But today, Mr. Verma didn't start the lesson. Instead, he stood at the front, arms crossed, staring at Sundar in silence. After a long moment, he spoke. "You, come here." The room went silent as Sundar stood and walked to the front. Mr. Verma held a thin file in his hands, tapping it against his palm. "Do you think you're clever?" the teacher asked. Sundar hesitated. Ben shook his head. Mr. Verma sneered. Then why did you embarrass me yesterday? You think you're better than the rest of us? Smarter? Sundar swallowed. I just wanted to solve the problem. Asterisk, the teacher's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. Fine, if you love solving problems so much, here's another. He handed Sundar a sealed envelope. You have 3 days to solve what's inside this. Bring it back when you're done. If you fail, you will stand here and admit in front of everyone that you are nothing but a fraud. Without another word, he turned his back to Sundar and began the lesson. Sundar returned to his seat, clutching the envelope. It felt heavy for its size. Boys craned their necks to see what was inside, but he didn't open it yet. Instead, he kept it in his lap, feeling the weight of the challenge sinking into his bones. The rest of the day passed in a blur of numbers and chalk and whispers. When the final bell rang, Sundar walked home slowly. The air was cooler now, and the streets glistened under the soft evening light. When he reached his house, he climbed straight to the roof and sat there alone, with the envelope resting on his knees. Asterisk. He tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in dense equations, the kind he had only glimpsed in his father's old engineering books. But this was more than that. It wasn't just a problem. It was a maze, twisting and turning in impossible directions. As his eyes scanned the page, he felt a strange chill, as if the paper itself was alive and watching him dot at the bottom of the page. In Mr. Verma's sharp handwriting were just 4 words. Let's see you try. For the first time, Sundar felt doubt creeping in. What if he couldn't solve it? What if yesterday had just been luck? But then he felt something else, stronger than fear, a quiet determination rising in him like fire. He wouldn't let this man crush him. He wouldn't let anyone tell him what he could or couldn't do. He took a deep breath and began writing in the margins of the paper, numbers flowing from his mind to his fingers like water. Hours passed. The moon rose and the stars came out. But Sundar didn't notice. He was somewhere else entirely, in the heart of the problem, chasing it, wrestling with it, learning its secrets. But just as he thought he was close to solving it, something strange happened. A shadow moved behind him. He turned his head slightly and froze. There, standing at the far end of the roof, was Mr. Verma himself, watching him with cold eyes. You shouldn't be here, Sundar said softly, though his voice trembled. Mr. Verma stepped closer, his shoes silent on the roof tiles. You think this is a game, boy? He said, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're playing with. He snatched the paper from Sundar's hands and crumpled it. This ends now. But before Sundar could reply, Mr. Verma's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, then glanced at Sundar with something like panic in his eyes. Then he spoke into the phone. He's here, but he's not ready yet. He hung up, dropped the paper at Sundar's feet, and walked away. Disappearing down the stairs without another word, Sundar sat frozen under the stars, staring at the crumpled page in his lap. He picked it up slowly, smoothed it out, and stared at the equations again. And that's when he saw it, a hidden pattern at the bottom corner of the page. Numbers arranged in a way that didn't seem random. But as he reached for his pencil to work it out, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. Run. Now. Fast. Sundar single quotes stopped. He looked up at the empty rooftop. And somewhere below, in the shadows, he heard footsteps climbing the stairs. Asterisk, the hidden pattern footsteps were slow at first, deliberate. Each one echoed through the stairwell below, faint but impossible to ignore. Sundar's ears caught every sound, the scrape of a shoe against the concrete, the tiny rattle of metal in a pocket, the kind of footsteps that didn't rush because they didn't need to. They already believed they would catch him. He stood frozen on the rooftop, the night wind tugging at his shirt. The crumpled page of equations was still in his hand, slightly damp from his sweat. The phone buzzed again in his pocket, vibrating like a tiny trapped bird. He pulled it out and saw another message from the unknown number. Single quotes. Please. Now. Climb. His eyes darted around the rooftop. Above him was nothing but sky. But to his left, just beyond the water tank, was a narrow iron ladder that led to an even higher platform, one he had never noticed before. It disappeared into the dark. The footsteps grew louder, closer. He could hear breathing now, heavy and calm, without another thought. He stuffed the paper into his pocket, slipped the phone into his shirt, and dashed toward the ladder. His sandals scraped against the rooftop as he ran, and for the first time, he heard the footsteps below quicken. Breaking into a run, he gripped the cold rungs of the ladder and began to climb. The iron was slick with rainwater. His fingers ached as he pulled himself upward, higher and higher, the rooftop shrinking below him. At one point, his foot slipped and his body swung sideways, scraping his knuckles hard against the metal. But he didn't stop. The air grew colder. The higher he climbed, the wind stronger, whistling in his ears. His breath came fast now, and his heart felt like it would tear through his chest when he finally reached the top platform. He pulled himself over the edge and lay flat for a moment, staring at the stars. They looked closer here, brighter. But he didn't have time to admire them. Not now. He rolled over and crawled to the far edge of the platform, peering down just in time to see two figures appear on the rooftop below. One of them he recognized instantly. But the other was taller, wearing a dark overcoat that flapped in the wind. His face hidden under a hat. Mr. Verma was pointing upward, his voice carried faintly by the wind. He went up there, he said. But he won't get far. The taller man said nothing. He simply turned his face upward, and for the briefest moment, Sundar thought he saw the man smile. Then the man pulled something from his pocket. A small flashlight, and shone it into the dark where Sundar lay. The beam swung back and forth, closer and closer. Sundar pressed himself flat against the cold platform, heart hammering. He knew he couldn't stay here. Sooner or later, they'd come up after him. He needed to move. He scanned the rooftop below, then the surrounding buildings. About 20 feet away, another rooftop jutted out at a slightly lower height. Between him and that roof was nothing but air. He swallowed hard. He had never jumped from anything in his life. Never even climbed a tree higher than a few branches. But something deep inside whispered to him. A quiet, certain voice that you can do this. The flashlight beam swung closer. Sundar backed up a few steps, took a deep breath, and ran. For one terrifying second, he was in the air, arms flailing, the wind roaring in his ears. Then he landed hard on his hands and knees on the next rooftop, pain shooting up his arms. He rolled onto his back and lay still, gasping for breath. He heard shouting behind him, the sound of hurried footsteps, but he didn't wait to see what happened next. He scrambled to his feet and ran across the roof toward a narrow stairwell that led down to the street. The stairwell smelled of damp stone and rust. The air was heavy here, thick with the scent of wet earth. He stumbled down the steps two at a time, gripping the rail to keep himself from falling. When he reached the bottom, he burst out into the alleyway. It was empty. The street lamps flickered faintly above, their weak light casting long, strange shadows. Water pooled in the cracks of the street, and the walls on either side were covered in old, torn posters. He turned left and ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to keep moving. After what felt like forever, he ducked into another alley, leaned against a wall, and let himself slide to the ground. His chest heaved with each breath. His palms were scraped, his knees bruised. But he was alive when the sound of footsteps and voices faded far behind him. He finally dared to take out the paper again. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it against the ground. Now, in the dim light of the street lamp, he studied the lower corner, the hidden pattern he'd noticed before. At first, it looked like just a cluster of numbers. But as he traced them with his finger, he realized they weren't random. The numbers formed coordinates, latitude and longitude. Location. His phone buzzed again. He answered this time. The same smooth voice he'd heard before. The man who had given him the card spoke quietly. Good, the man said. You're still alive. Sundar swallowed. What's happening? Who are they? What do they want from me? The man was silent for a long moment. Then he said, they want to break you before you understand what you really are. Sundar gripped the phone tighter. What am I? Another pause. A key, the man said simply. You're a key to something very old, very powerful, and they want to use you. Sundar shook his head. This is insane. Asterisk. Listen to me, the man said. Go to the coordinates on the paper. Do not stop. Do not talk to anyone. When you get there, you'll find the rest of the answers. But if they catch you before, then it's over. Sundar opened his mouth to reply, but the line went dead. He lowered the phone slowly, feeling the weight of the words settle inside him. A key? To what? He folded the paper and tucked it away, then stood up. His knees trembled, but he forced them steady. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled cleaner now. Sharper. He started walking. The city was quieter now, the streets emptying as the hour grew late. But every so often he felt eyes on him, shadows that shifted just slightly. Footsteps. That stopped when he stopped. Someone was still following him. He ducked into another alley and crouched low behind a stack of crates. Sure enough, a tall figure passed by the mouth of the alley a moment later. The same overcoat, the same calm stride. Sundar's breath caught in his throat. He waited until the figure moved on before slipping back onto the street, keeping to the darkest edges. At the edge of the city, the buildings grew smaller and the streets rougher. Finally, he reached the old railway yard, abandoned now. Overgrown with weeds and rusting metal, he checked the paper again. Asterisk the coordinates. Pointed to a specific storage shed at the far end of the yard. As he walked toward it, he heard a faint sound. Something metallic, clicking softly in the shadows. He froze, straining to listen. Then the voice came, low and calm. You shouldn't have come here alone. He spun around. Asterisk. Emma Verma stepped out from behind a stack of crates. The taller man at his side. But now Sundar could see the taller man's face, clearly for the first time. And it wasn't just a man. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, a strange pale blue. His smile was thin, sharp, and wrong somehow, like a mask stretched too tight. You were supposed to fail, the taller figure said. You were supposed to give up, Mr. Verma added, his voice tight. It's not too late, boy. Hand over the paper. Walk away. But Sundar shook his head, feeling something new rising in him. Not fear this time, but something harder, sharper. No, he said softly. The taller man tilted his head slightly, his eerie smile fading. Then he reached into his coat, but before Sundar could move, the door of the storage shed behind him creaked open, just slightly, and a hand shot out, grabbing Sundar's shoulder and yanking him inside. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed him, and outside, he heard Mr. Verma shouting angrily, followed by the sound of footsteps running past. Sundar stumbled backward, gasping until a faint. Light flickered in the corner of the shed. There, standing in the shadows, was Arjun Sen, the man from the night before, holding a lantern. He gave Sundar a long, measuring look. Then he spoke. Welcome, Sundar, he said. You've just taken your first step. Asterisk the hidden door with faint light from Arjun's lantern cast long, trembling shadows on the walls of the storage shed. Dust danced in the air like tiny ghosts. Sundar held the map in both hands, his fingers shaking slightly. The paper was thick, old, the edges worn and torn as though it had passed through many hands before his. The map was filled with intricate lines and symbols he didn't recognize, a labyrinth of pathways and strange markings. But what caught his eyes most were the 4 words written boldly at the top. Find the hidden door. He stared at them for a long moment, feeling something cold and heavy settle in his chest. Arjun moved closer, his eyes calm but sharp, like someone who had seen too much and learned to live with it. He crouched beside Sundar and pointed to a spot on the map where 3 lines converged. The place was marked with a faint circle. This, Arjun said softly, is where it begins. Sundar swallowed. Where what begins? Arjun hesitated. Then he sighed. setting the lantern down beside them. "You have a gift," he began, his voice low, almost reverent. "You can see patterns that most people will never see. You can solve what others can't even understand. But that gift, it's not just a talent, it's a key. A key to doors that have been locked for centuries. Doors to knowledge, power, and danger." Sundar frowned, his eyes on the map. "What kind of danger?" Arjun leaned back against the wall, his face partly in shadow. "There are people like the ones chasing you who want to use your gift to open something that should never be opened. They don't care if it destroys you in the process." The words hung in the air between. Then, heavy and bitter, Sundar stared at the map again, his mind racing. "Why me?" he asked finally, almost whispering. Arjun tilted his head, studying him. "Because you solved it. Because you saw what no one else could. Because, whether you like it or not, you're different." The silence that followed was thick. Sundar felt the weight of it pressing on his shoulders. He thought of his parents at home, probably asleep by now, thinking he was safe somewhere nearby. He thought of the quiet mornings when he sat at the back of the class, unnoticed, dreaming, only of finishing his homework and going home. And now here he was, holding a map to something he didn't even understand, running from men whose eyes glowed in the dark. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Where does the map lead?" he asked finally, his voice steadier now. Arjun gave a small, approving nod. "To a place called Devgar. It's an abandoned temple deep in the hills, about 50 miles from here. The door is hidden somewhere inside." Sundar traced the circle on the map with his fingertip. "We leave now," Arjun added. Sundar looked up sharply. "Now? In the middle of the night?" Arjun's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Do you want them to catch you before you even get there?" A shiver ran down Sundar's spine. He folded the map carefully and tucked it into his pocket. "Let's go." They slipped out of the storage shed quietly, sticking to the shadows, as they moved through the empty railway yard. The sky above was still dark, but a faint hint of dawn glowed on the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and a train horn wailed mournfully. Arjun led the way to a small motorcycle parked behind a pile of crates. He handed Sundar a battered helmet. "Hold tight," he said simply. Sundar climbed on behind, him clutching the sides of the seat as the engine sputtered to life. The motorcycle roared softly, then carried them out of the yard and into the night. The road was long and winding. Fields stretched out on either side, dark and endless, broken, now and then by clusters of trees. Sundar watched the world blur past, the cool wind whipping his face, and felt something stir inside him, a strange mix of fear and excitement, as though some invisible thread was pulling him toward something he was meant to find. After an hour, the city lights faded completely, replaced by the quiet rhythm of the countryside. The road grew narrower, rougher. Birds began to sing faintly in the trees, and the first rays of sun painted the sky in soft gold dot. Finally, Arjun pulled over near a dirt path that disappeared into the hills. He killed the engine and dismounted. "We walk from here," he said. They left the motorcycle behind and followed the path upward. The air grew cooler as they climbed, and the ground was damp with dew. Sundar's legs ached, and his breath came in quick bursts, but he kept going. Eyes fixed on the man ahead of him. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center stood the ruins of an ancient temple, its stone walls cracked and overgrown with vines, its entrance partly hidden by hanging branches. Arjun stopped and turned to him. "This is it." Sundar stared at the temple, his heart beating faster. Something about the place felt alive, as though it was waiting for him. They stepped inside. The air was cool and musty, filled with the scent of damp stone. Faint carvings covered the walls, strange symbols and figures Sundar couldn't recognize. The floor was littered with broken tiles and scattered leaves. Arjun handed him the lantern. "Find the door," he said quietly. Sundar hesitated, then moved deeper into the temple. He ran his fingers over the walls, studying the patterns carved into the stone. At first, nothing stood out. But then, in the far corner of the room, he noticed something. A small square of tiles arranged in a way that didn't match. the rest of the floor. He knelt and brushed away the dust. The tiles were covered in numbers, faint but clear. He stared at them, his mind sharpening. He could feel it again, that strange pull, the numbers whispering to him, arranging themselves into a pattern. He closed his eyes for a moment, then began pressing the tiles in a specific order, guided by some instinct he didn't fully understand. With a soft rumble, the floor beneath him shifted. The square of tiles sank slowly, revealing a narrow stairway descending into darkness. Arjun stepped up beside him, his face unreadable. "You found it?" he murmured. Sundar swallowed, staring into the dark stairwell. "What's down there?" Arjun met his eyes. "The truth." Before Sundar could respond, a faint noise behind them made them both spin around. At the entrance of the temple, silhouetted by the morning light, stood Mr. Verma, and behind him the tall figure in the overcoat, his pale blue eyes glowing. Faintly in the shadows, "You're too late, Mr. Verma called out, his voice cold and sharp. "Give us the map, boy." "Step away from the door." Arjun's hand shot out, gripping Sundar's arm tightly. "Go," he hissed. "Now, don't look back." But Sundar couldn't move. His eyes were locked on the tall figure, who was slowly stepping forward, his smile thin and cruel. "You don't understand what you're opening, Mr. Verma said again. "You don't even know what you are, boy. If you go down there, you won't come back the same." Sundar's breath caught in his throat. He glanced at Arjun, whose eyes were fierce and unyielding. "Trust yourself," Arjun whispered behind them. The tall figure began to move faster now, his steps quickening, his hand reaching into his coat. Sundar clenched his fists, took one last breath, and plunged down the stairs into the darkness. He heard Arjun shout something behind him, a sharp command, and then the sound of scuffling feet. A loud crash, and silence. The stairwell was narrow and steep, the air growing colder as he descended. The light from the lantern flickered, casting strange shadows on the damp walls. Finally, he reached the bottom. Before him stretched a vast underground chamber, lit by faint, bluish light that seemed to come from nowhere. The walls were covered in even more intricate carvings, symbols, numbers, patterns that felt both ancient and strangely familiar. And at the far end of the chamber stood the door. It wasn't like any door he had ever seen. It was tall and curved, made of dark stone, with countless tiny gears and dials embedded in its surface. The gears ticked softly, as though alive. At the center of the door was a single empty keyhole, surrounded by numbers carved so finely they almost shimmered. Sundar stepped closer, his breath shallow, his fingers brushing the surface of the stone. He could feel it, a quiet hum in the air, a deep, endless rhythm that seemed to match his own heartbeat. And then, faintly, he heard a whisper, not in his ears, but somewhere deeper in his mind. "Solve me." An eye open. He closed his eyes, letting the numbers flood his senses. The patterns on the door seemed to move under his fingertips, rearranging themselves, beckoning him closer. He placed both hands flat against the stone, ready to begin. But just then, a sharp, metallic click behind him made him freeze. He spun around. There, at the bottom of the stairs, stood Mr. Verma, his glasses glinting in the dim light, and beside him, the tall figure stepped forward, his glowing eyes fixed on Sundar. "Too slow," the figure said softly, his voice like a blade. And with that, he raised his hand, and the chamber erupted in blinding light. Asterisk beyond the door when Sundar opened his eyes. The light was gone. The air was thick and heavy, humming faintly as though the very walls breathed. He lay flat on a cold surface, smooth and hard, with faint patterns carved into it. The chamber was no longer lit by bluish light, but instead glowed with a strange golden hue, soft yet unearthly, casting long shadows on walls that seemed impossibly tall. He sat up slowly, blinking. His hands trembled as he pushed himself upright, and he realized he was no longer in the underground chamber. The door, The massive stone door with its gears and dials was now open behind him. And beyond it lay a place he couldn't have imagined. Before him stretched a vast hall, larger than any building he had ever seen. Towering pillars rose. Into the darkness above, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings. Numbers and equations spiraling upward in perfect harmony. Strange, weightless orbs of light floated silently between the columns, casting delicate patterns across the floor. But what struck him most were the sounds. Not quite music, not quite voices, something in between. It was as if thousands of whispers and notes blended together into a melody just at the edge of understanding. It vibrated in his bones, settled behind his eyes. Slowly, he stood. His legs were unsteady, but the pull, that strange, undeniable pull, urged him forward. Each step echoed softly through the vastness. As he walked, he passed carvings so detailed they looked alive, scenes of people standing before similar doors, their hands raised as numbers swirled around them. Diagrams of stars and constellations with tiny equations tucked between them. Spirals of symbols that almost seemed to shift as he moved past Dot at the center of the hall. He stopped Dot there. Rising from the floor was a stone pedestal. Dot on top of it sat an object unlike anything he had ever seen. A perfect sphere of glass, inside which countless numbers danced like fireflies. They moved in impossible ways, colliding and merging, rearranging themselves faster than the eye could follow. He reached out to touch it, but before his fingers could graze the surface, a voice spoke behind him. "You made it." He spun around. Mr. Verma stood at the edge of the hall, his glasses reflecting the golden light. But there was something different about him now. His anger and arrogance were gone. He looked smaller somehow, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Dot, and beside him stood the tall figure in the overcoat, his glowing blue eyes fixed on Sundar. But the smile was gone now too, replaced by something colder, hungrier. "Do you even know where you are?" The figure asked softly, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast hall. Sundar swallowed hard, but his voice came out steadier than he expected. "What is this place?" Verma took a step closer. "This," he said quietly, "is the origin. The place where all patterns begin and all answers end. Only a few have ever reached it." The tall figure tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "But you," he added, "you may be the first to truly understand it." Sundar glanced back at the pedestal. The numbers inside the sphere pulsed faintly now, as if waiting for him. "What happens if I touch it?" Sundar asked, his voice low. Mr. Verma hesitated, his gaze darting to the floor. But the tall figure spoke first. "You open the way," he said simply, "and everything changes." Sundar frowned. "Changes how?" "For you," the figure said, taking another step closer. "You'll see everything. Every answer, every question, every path. The world will unfold before you like a book. But—" he paused, his pale smile returning faintly. "For the rest of us, it ends." Sundar froze, staring at him. Mr. Verma's voice trembled slightly as he finally spoke. "They've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who can solve the sequence, open the door, and finish what they started." Sundar felt his chest tighten. He looked down at his hands, still faintly smeared with dust from the door. "And if I don't?" he asked quietly. The tall figure's smile faded. "Then it closes again, and you never leave this place." Sundar turned back to the sphere. The numbers inside had slowed now, almost expectant. He could feel it calling to him the same way. The equations on the blackboard had called to him, the same way the map had whispered. The same quiet rhythm inside him that matched the hum of this strange hall. He thought of his parents, their tiny house, his father's rough hands, his mother's quiet smile. He thought of the boys at school, staring at him as though he was a stranger. He thought of Arjun, who had pulled him from the shadows and told him to trust himself. And he thought of all the times he had hidden at the back of the class, solving problems quietly while everyone else ignored him. He looked up and for the first time, he spoke without hesitation. "Why me?" Our Verma met his gaze at last, his own eyes dark with something like regret. Because you see what the rest of us can't, he said softly. You always have. The tall figure's voice cut through the quiet. Time's up. Choose. Sundar took a step closer to the pedestal. The numbers inside the sphere brightened, swirling faster now, as though sensing his decision. But before his fingers could touch it, the golden light around him began to flicker violently. He stopped, turning toward the sound of footsteps running down the vast hall. Arjun burst into view, his face flushed, his breath coming in gasps. In his hand was a small black notebook, its cover frayed and torn. Don't, he shouted, his voice echoing off the pillars. Don't touch it. Sundar froze, his heart pounding. Arjun stumbled closer, grabbing his shoulder. His eyes were wild, almost desperate. You're not ready, he said through gritted teeth. They want you to open it before you understand. That's how they win. You have to trust me. The tall figure's glowing eyes narrowed dangerously. He lies? He hissed. He's afraid of what you are. Arjun held up the notebook and thrust it into Sundar's hands. Look, he demanded. Sundar opened the notebook with trembling fingers. Inside were page after page of equations. Familiar ones, strange ones, impossible ones. But on the last page, written in bold, uneven letters, was a single sentence. The door is not the answer. It is the question. Sundar stared at the words, his chest tightening. The tall figure stepped closer, his presence colder now. Heavier. Don't listen, he growled. You're so close. Arjun shook him by the shoulders. Think, Sundar. You've always been good at thinking. This place, it's a trap. They've built it to make you choose too soon. Solve it properly. Find the truth before you open. Anything. Sundar's breath came faster, his mind racing. He looked back at the sphere, still pulsing faintly, waiting. Then at the tall figure, whose blue eyes burned like ice. Then at Arjun, whose grip on his shoulders trembled but firm. The hum of the hall grew louder, the lights above flickering wildly now. Numbers danced in the corners of his vision, spinning and twisting, begging for his attention. Choose, the tall figure said again, his voice sharp now. Open the way. Arjun's voice cut through the noise. Not yet. Not like this. Trust yourself, not them. Sundar's hands shook as he looked at the sphere one last time. He closed his eyes. And for the first time, he didn't just feel the numbers. He heard them, clear and calm, speaking to him like an old friend. Not yet, they said. Not this way. His eyes snapped open, and he stepped back from the pedestal. The tall figure hissed, his calm mask breaking, rage flashing in his glowing eyes. No, he shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. But Sundar shook his head. I'm not done solving yet, he said quietly. The golden light flared suddenly, blinding and sharp. The ground beneath him began to crack, the numbers on the walls spiraling out of control. Arjun grabbed his arm. Run, he said fiercely. The hall began to collapse around them, pillars breaking, the soft orbs of light bursting into sparks. The tall figure lunged forward, but Mr. Verma caught his arm, holding him back. Go, Arjun shouted, pulling Sundar toward a narrow corridor at the edge of the hall. The sound of stone grinding against stone filled the air, deafening. Behind them, the sphere shattered with a sound like thunder. Sundar ran, his lungs burning, the map clutched tight in his pocket. As they reached the end of the corridor, he looked back one last time. The hall and the strange, glowing door were swallowed in a storm of light and shadow. And then everything went silent. Asterisk. The final problem's morning sky was painted in quiet shades of gray and gold when Sundar and Arjun stepped away from the temple ruins. The air smelled of earth and dust, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Their footsteps crunched softly over the rocky path, each sound swallowed by the silence that hung around them like a heavy curtain. Behind them, the ancient stones stood still, as though nothing extraordinary had ever happened there. But Sundar could still feel it, that quiet hum, the memory of numbers whispering in his mind, the faint vibration of the door that had nearly opened. It lingered in his bones. Arjun finally stopped and placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder. Asterisk.